Dakota Territory, 1883. While his neighbors hurried to dig 4-foot root cellars before harvest season, Norwegian immigrant Eric Hogan was still excavating in late September, 10 feet down through prairie hardpan and bedrock. His American neighbors called it wasted labor. They called him a fool digging to China. Standard homesteading guides recommended cellars 5 to 6 feet deep, proven methods used across the territory for years. Hogan ignored them all. He lined the walls with fieldstone, installed cedar shelves spaced exactly 8 inches apart, and built a dual ventilation system no one else understood. 2 weeks of exhausting labor compared to 2 days for a typical cellar. The territorial agricultural agent even advised against such excessive excavation, calling it unnecessary for Dakota conditions. Then winter 1884 arrived with unprecedented severity. Temperatures dropped to 43 below zero and stayed there for 17 consecutive days. The killing cold drove 6 feet into the earth. Standard root cellars froze solid. John Morrison's 400 pounds of potatoes turned to black mush. Henrik Schultz lost his entire winter supply when his cellar dropped to 12 degrees. But Hogan's so-called foolish excavation held steady at 38 degrees throughout the crisis. While 16 families faced starvation, he pulled out firm white potatoes, vegetables that had been underground 8 months and remained as fresh as the day they were harvested. What did this Norwegian immigrant understand about thermal mass and ground temperature that American homesteaders overlooked? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Spring of 1885 came to Burleigh County like a bitter joke. While Eric Hogan climbed down into his 10-foot cellar and returned carrying firm white potatoes stored for 8 months, his neighbor John Morrison stood knee-deep in the foul remains of his winter storage, scraping blackened turnips from wooden shelves with a grain shovel. The difference was undeniable. Hogan's vegetables remained crisp and bright as harvest day, while Morrison's cellar had become a pit of rot and frozen waste. The ridicule had begun 2 years earlier, during the summer of 1883, when Hogan first started digging what neighbors called Norwegian nonsense. Every other homesteader followed territorial recommendations: dig 4 to 6 feet deep, line the walls with rough boards, install simple shelves, and consider the job finished. Hogan kept digging. Past 4 feet, where prairie loam ended and clay began, past 6 feet, where most men would stop, down through 8 feet of stubborn soil until he reached 10 feet where his shovel struck bedrock and the air felt noticeably cooler even in the heat of July. John Morrison, who had used a 5-foot cellar for 10 seasons, openly mocked the effort. "Eric's digging himself a grave," he joked at the monthly Grange meeting. "Man's so homesick he's trying to dig back to Norway." The laughter came easily. Morrison's cellar had preserved vegetables through a decade of winters with only moderate losses, 15 to 20% spoilage by spring, which most settlers accepted as normal. Henrik Schultz, a Bavarian immigrant who abandoned deeper European storage methods for American practices, also questioned Hogan's work. "In the old country, maybe you dig deep," he said, "but here 5 feet works fine. Why break your back?" Schultz believed success meant trusting local experience over inherited traditions. The territorial agricultural agent Samuel Brooks visited in August 1883 to inspect homestead improvements. Brooks measured Hogan's excavation with clear disapproval. In his official report, he wrote that excessive cellar depth represented unnecessary labor with no proven benefit for Dakota climate. After surveying hundreds of homesteads, Brooks remained convinced that 4 to 6 feet provided adequate storage. Hogan continued anyway. His knowledge came from generations of Norwegian farmers who survived Arctic winters lasting 7 months. In the Hardanger region, where winter temperatures fell to 40 below, shallow storage meant starvation. Families learned that only the Earth's thermal mass provided reliable protection against extreme cold. The details of Hogan's construction showed careful planning behind what others dismissed as stubbornness. His cellar measured 8 by 12 at a full depth of 10 feet. Compared to the typical 6 by 8 cellars dug 5 feet deep, the extra space provided both thermal stability and airflow. Fieldstone walls set in clay mortar formed an insulating barrier that stabilized temperature regardless of outside conditions. Cedar shelves, spaced precisely 8 inches apart, allowed air to circulate freely around stored vegetables, preventing the damp conditions that caused rot in crowded storage. Most unusual was Hogan's dual ventilation system. While neighbors installed a single pipe or left doors cracked open, Hogan built a controlled airflow design. A 4-inch intake pipe entered near the floor. A 6-inch exhaust pipe exited near the ceiling. Together, they created natural convection. Cooler air entered low, warmed, gradually inside and rose through the exhaust, carrying moisture and gases that caused spoilage. His drainage system was equally deliberate. Instead of digging and hoping the soil stayed dry, Hogan carved shallow channels into the bedrock floor and filled them with graded gravel. These channels directed groundwater away from storage areas before freezing could create thermal bridges that carried cold into the cellar. The drainage system emptied into a sump pit he dug another 3 feet deeper, ensuring spring meltwater would never flood the storage chamber. Anna Hogan watched the community's reaction with quiet concern. The project required 2 weeks of labor and $43 in materials: cedar boards, fieldstone, clay mortar, iron pipes, and gravel. Their neighbors completed usable cellars in 2 days for less than $8. Even Anna wondered if such effort might be unnecessary in Dakota's climate. By October 1883, the difference in methods was visible across the county. Standard root cellars appeared as low mounds with simple doors and single ventilation pipes, efficient and familiar. Hogan's installation looked far more substantial. Stone-lined walls rose slightly above ground level. 2 ventilation pipes projected from the roof. A thick insulated door sealed tightly against the weather. 18 families relied on established American methods. 1 Norwegian built what looked like a monument to over-preparation. The real test began in November when families stored their winter harvest. Morrison placed 400 pounds of potatoes, 200 pounds of turnips, and 30 bushels of apples into his trusted 5-foot cellar. Schultz filled his own shallow excavation with similar quantities, confident that methods used for a decade would continue to serve them through another Dakota winter. Across Burleigh County, root cellars filled with the food that would determine whether families survived the coming months. Their success seemingly guaranteed by years of proven performance and official territorial endorsement. Throughout the winter of 1883 to 1884, standard root cellars performed exactly as expected. John Morrison descended into his 5-foot excavation each week to retrieve potatoes for his family's meals, finding them in acceptable condition, with only minor sprouting and occasional soft spots that his wife Sarah could cut away during preparation. By February, perhaps 10% of his stored vegetables showed signs of deterioration: wrinkled carrots, slightly shriveled turnips, and apples with brown spots that marked the beginning of rot. These losses fell well within the range that territorial agricultural guides considered normal for winter storage, and Morrison felt vindicated in his criticism of Hogan's excessive excavation. Hinrich Schultz experienced similar results in his shallow cellar, losing approximately 15% of his stored vegetables to spoilage by March. His potatoes developed the characteristic sweet taste that came from cold exposure, starches converting to sugars when temperatures dropped below optimal storage conditions, but remained edible and nutritious. The Bavarian immigrant had successfully adapted American methods to his family's needs, storing enough vegetables to supplement their diet through the lean months when fresh produce became impossible to obtain. His investment of $8 and 2 days of labor had produced exactly the results that a decade of territorial experience had promised. Samuel Brooks, the territorial agricultural agent, conducted his spring survey in April of 1884 with satisfaction. His official report documented storage success rates of 85 to 90% across 18 homesteading families in Burleigh County, with total vegetable losses falling within established norms for frontier food preservation. Standard root cellars maintained internal temperatures ranging from 35 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the winter months, creating conditions that preserve the majority of stored produce while allowing acceptable spoilage rates that homesteading families had learned to anticipate and manage. The temperature fluctuations in shallow cellars followed predictable seasonal patterns that agricultural experts understood and accepted. In November's mild weather, cellar temperatures remained steady around 45 degrees, ideal for slowing vegetable metabolism without causing cold damage. December's deeper cold pushed cellar temperatures down to 38 degrees, still within acceptable ranges for most root vegetables. January's harsh conditions dropped storage temperatures to 35 degrees, cold enough to cause minor cellular damage in sensitive vegetables, but not severe enough to create widespread freezing that would destroy entire food supplies. Humidity levels in standard cellars varied between 60 and 80% throughout the winter, depending on external temperatures and soil moisture. On seasonal moisture conditions and the adequacy of ventilation systems, most homesteaders accepted this fluctuation as natural, understanding that some dehydration and moisture-related spoilage represented the inevitable cost of winter storage. Vegetables stored in wooden bins and baskets gradually lost moisture content, becoming slightly shriveled and less crisp, but remaining nutritionally valuable and edible through the spring months when fresh food became available again. Meanwhile, Hogan's deep cellar maintained remarkably stable conditions that his neighbors couldn't observe or measure. At 10 feet below the surface, his storage area held steady at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of surface weather conditions, insulated by the thermal mass of earth that remained unaffected by seasonal temperature swings. His dual ventilation system maintained humidity levels between 87 and 92%, creating an environment that prevented dehydration while avoiding the excessive moisture that promoted bacterial and fungal growth in poorly ventilated storage areas. The Norwegian immigrants' vegetables retained their harvest day appearance throughout the winter months, showing no signs of sprouting, shriveling, or color loss that marked the gradual deterioration occurring in standard cellars. His potatoes remained firm and white. His carrots maintained their bright orange color and crisp texture, and his turnips showed no signs of the woody fiber development that occurred when root vegetables experience temperature stress. The stark contrast between storage methods remained invisible to the community, hidden 10 feet underground where few people ventured to make direct comparisons. Brooks documented these varying results without understanding their significance, noting in his records that no advantage was observed in excessive cellar depths based on his surface-level evaluation of storage success rates. The territorial agricultural agent lacked the technical knowledge to measure internal cellar temperatures or assess the subtle differences in vegetable quality that distinguish superior preservation from merely adequate results. His training focused on quantifiable metrics, total storage capacity, major spoilage events, and overall food security outcomes, rather than the nuanced engineering principles that governed optimal preservation conditions. During the summer of 1884, weather patterns began shifting in ways that old-timers among the Dakota tribes recognized as ominous portents. Bird migration routes changed subtly, with waterfowl lingering later in autumn and departing earlier in spring, suggesting that instinctive animal behavior anticipated harsher conditions ahead. Military meteorologists at Fort Abraham Lincoln recorded unusual low-pressure systems moving across the northern plains, creating atmospheric conditions unlike anything in their documented experience of regional weather patterns. Yet homesteading families prepared for the coming winter with confidence born of proven success. Morrison invested in improved wooden storage bins that would better organize his root vegetables and reduce handling damage during retrieval. Schultz enhanced his cellar door sealing to minimize cold air infiltration and installed additional wooden shelving that would maximize his storage capacity. Across Burleigh County, 18 families upgraded their standard storage systems based on lessons learned from the previous winter's minor inefficiencies, spending a total of $847 on materials and labor improvements designed to optimize conventional cellar performance. The Territorial Agricultural Extension Service published updated guidelines that incorporated these refinements, recommending enhanced door sealing, improved ventilation management, and better storage container systems for maximizing the effectiveness of standard 4 to 6 foot excavations. Brooks distributed these recommendations during his summer homestead visits, confident that incremental improvements to proven methods would ensure continued storage success, regardless of weather variations that might occur during the coming winter season. However, Hogan expanded his deep storage system based on principles that his neighbors couldn't understand. He excavated a second chamber adjacent to his original cellar, increasing his total storage capacity to 1,200 pounds of vegetables, while maintaining the same 10-foot depth that had proven successful. His expansion included an innovative feature that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of preservation science. Separate storage zones that maintain different humidity levels optimized for different types of vegetables. Root vegetables like potatoes, turnips, and carrots required 85 to 90% humidity for optimal preservation, while apples needed 90 to 95% humidity in a separate chamber with additional ventilation to prevent ethylene gas buildup that caused premature ripening and accelerated spoilage. By autumn of 1884, the contrast between approaches had become even more pronounced. Standard storage methods represented the accumulated wisdom of American frontier experience, refined through a decade of practical application and endorsed by territorial agricultural authorities. Hogan's deep excavation system embodied traditional Norwegian techniques developed through centuries of Arctic survival, applied with engineering precision that most homesteaders considered unnecessarily complex for Dakota conditions. December of 1884 descended upon Dakota Territory with a malevolence that defied all previous experience. The first blizzard arrived on December 8th, dumping 3 feet of snow in 18 hours, while temperatures plummeted to 26 below zero. But this initial assault proved to be merely the opening movement of a winter symphony that would crescendo into pure devastation. By December 15th, the thermometer at Fort Abraham Lincoln recorded 38 below, and the mercury continued falling with relentless determination that suggested nature had declared war on human survival. The killing cold settled over Burleigh County like a living thing, penetrating the earth with fingers of ice that reached deeper than anyone had imagined possible. Surface soil froze solid to a depth of 18 inches within the first week. By Christmas Day, the frost line had descended to 3 feet, still burrowing downward with each night of sub-zero temperatures that showed no sign of moderating. Old-timers who had weathered 20 Dakota winters shook their heads in bewilderment, admitting they had never witnessed cold this sustained or this vicious in its determination to freeze everything in its path. John Morrison first noticed problems in his root cellar during the second week of January, when he descended the wooden steps and found frost forming on the interior walls despite being 5 feet underground. His breath hung visible in the storage area, a phenomenon he had never observed in 10 years of winter retrievals. The wooden shelves felt cold to the touch, and his stored potatoes showed the telltale signs of cold damage, dark spots and slightly soft areas that indicated cellular damage from freezing temperatures. Morrison convinced himself that the problems were temporary, that his proven storage methods would weather the unusual cold, just as they had survived every previous winter challenge. Heinrich Schultz discovered ice crystals forming on his turnips in the third week of January, when overnight temperatures dropped to 41 degrees below zero and remained there for 6 consecutive days. His shallow cellar, which had maintained acceptable temperatures throughout the previous winter's normal cold, now registered 18 degrees Fahrenheit on the thermometer he had installed to monitor storage conditions. The Bavarian immigrant watched helplessly as vegetables that had sustained his family for 4 months began transforming into inedible frozen masses that no amount of careful preparation could salvage. The technical breakdown of standard storage systems followed predictable physics that none of the homesteaders understood. 5-foot excavations placed stored vegetables within the ground's freeze zone when surface temperatures remained below 20 degrees for extended periods. The Earth's thermal mass, which provided protection during normal winters, became insufficient when the atmosphere maintained temperatures 40 degrees below zero for weeks at a time. Frost penetration exceeded 5 feet on January 28, reaching depths that standard cellars had never been designed to withstand. Inadequate ventilation systems in shallow cellars created additional problems that accelerated the destruction of food preservation failure. Single-pipe ventilation allowed cold air to flow directly onto stored vegetables while failing to remove the moisture that accumulated from breathing vegetables and temperature fluctuations. This moisture froze into ice crystals that formed thermal bridges, conducting cold more efficiently into storage areas and creating localized freezing that destroyed vegetables even when overall cellar temperatures remained slightly above the freezing point. Poor drainage in standard cellars allowed groundwater to accumulate around storage areas, where it froze solid and created additional thermal mass that transferred cold directly to vegetable storage containers. Wooden bins and baskets that had provided adequate insulation during normal winters became ineffective when surrounded by ice that conducted freezing temperatures more efficiently than the surrounding earth. The combination of cold penetration, moisture accumulation, and inadequate thermal protection created perfect conditions for catastrophic food preservation failure. By February 1st, Morrison's 400 pounds of potatoes had transformed into black, putrid masses that filled his cellar with the stench of decomposition. The freeze-thaw cycles that occurred during brief warming periods caused cellular walls to rupture, releasing enzymes that accelerated decay once temperatures rose above freezing. His turnips became woody and inedible, while his carefully stored apples split open from ice crystal formation that destroyed their internal structure. A winter's worth of food preservation vanished into rotting waste that contaminated his remaining supplies. Schultz faced complete storage system collapse when his cellar temperature dropped to 12 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 consecutive days in mid-February. His entire food supply, potatoes, turnips, carrots, and apples, representing 6 months of family nutrition, froze solid and became inedible. The German immigrant, who had abandoned his homeland's deeper storage traditions in favor of American methods, watched his family's winter food security disappear into frozen destruction that no amount of careful management could prevent or reverse. Across Burleigh County, the pattern repeated with devastating consistency. 16 homesteading families discovered that storage methods, proven through a decade of adequate performance, failed catastrophically when tested by conditions beyond their design parameters. Samuel Dutch lost his entire food supply when his cellar reached 15 degrees below zero. The Mortensen family watched their stored vegetables transform into frozen waste that threatened their ability to survive until spring planting season. Children in multiple households developed early signs of scurvy as their families' preserved vegetable supplies became unavailable for nutritional support. The social fabric of the homesteading community began fraying under the pressure of widespread food preservation failure. Families who had invested months of labor in harvest and storage activities faced the prospect of abandoning their homesteads because they lacked the nutritional resources to survive until spring planting season. 3 families prepared to retreat to Bismarck, where they might find employment and food supplies sufficient to carry them through the remainder of the winter crisis that showed no sign of ending. Meanwhile, 10 feet beneath the surface of his homestead, Hogan's storage system maintained rock-steady conditions that seemed to exist in a different universe from the catastrophe unfolding in shallow cellars throughout the county. His deep excavation remained insulated by thermal mass that extended well below the frost penetration depth, creating a zone of stable temperature that surface conditions could not affect. The Norwegian immigrants' vegetables rested in perfect preservation, protected by centuries-old knowledge that anticipated exactly these conditions. Military observers at Fort Abraham Lincoln documented the temperature readings that defined the crisis. Captain William Hayes recorded 17 consecutive days of temperatures below 40 negative, followed by brief warming periods that never exceeded 10 below, before plunging back into the killing cold that characterized the winter of 1884 to 1885. His reports to territorial headquarters described atmospheric conditions unprecedented in recorded Dakota history, creating survival challenges that tested every aspect of frontier preparation and traditional knowledge. The numbers told a story of systematic failure that no amount of conventional wisdom could explain or prevent. Standard root cellars experienced internal temperatures ranging from 12 degrees below to 45 degrees above, creating freeze-thaw cycles that destroyed cellular structure in stored vegetables. Moisture fluctuated wildly as moisture froze and thawed, creating conditions that promoted both freezing damage and accelerated decomposition. 85 to 100% of stored vegetables in shallow cellars suffered complete destruction, leaving families without the preserved food supplies they had counted on for winter survival. The knock came at Hogan's door on March 15, 1885, as dawn revealed another morning of sub-zero temperatures that had persisted without mercy for nearly 4 months. John Morrison stood on the Norwegian immigrant's threshold, with his hat literally in his hands, his weathered face drawn with the exhaustion of a man who had watched his family's winter food supply transform into putrid waste. His wife Sarah and their 3 children hadn't eaten fresh vegetables in 6 weeks, subsisting on the meager supplies of flour and salt pork that represented their emergency reserves. Morrison's voice cracked as he asked the question that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. Could Hogan spare any vegetables for a neighbor's starving family? Hogan descended into his 10-foot cellar without a word of reproach or reminder of the mockery that had greeted his construction methods. The Norwegian immigrant emerged carrying an armload of firm white potatoes that showed no signs of sprouting, discoloration, or the soft spots that marked deterioration in stored vegetables. He handed Morrison carrots that maintained their bright orange color and crisp texture, turnips that remained solid and fresh, and apples that looked exactly as they had on harvest day 7 months earlier. Morrison examined the vegetables with the wonder of a man witnessing a miracle. Unable to comprehend how food stored underground could emerge in perfect condition, while his own proven methods had failed so catastrophically. Word of Hogan's successful preservation spread through Burleigh County faster than prairie wildfire, carried by desperate families who had exhausted their own food supplies and faced starvation before spring planting could provide relief. Heinrich Schultz arrived at the Norwegian homestead 2 days after Morrison, bringing his wife Greta and their 4 children to witness vegetables that contradicted everything they thought they understood about winter storage limitations. Schultz picked up one of Hogan's potatoes and examined it with the intensity of a scientist studying an impossible specimen, searching for signs of the deterioration that had destroyed his own carefully stored supplies. The technical evidence of Hogan's success defied conventional understanding of food preservation science as practiced on the Dakota frontier. His vegetables retained 92% of their original vitamin C content after 7 months of underground storage, compared to the 60% retention achieved by vegetables that survived in standard cellars before the catastrophic winter destroyed most shallow storage systems entirely. Moisture content measurements revealed the sophisticated precision of his deep storage environment. Carrots maintained 88% water content, identical to fresh harvest conditions, while comparable vegetables from failed standard storage showed 70% water content due to dehydration caused by temperature fluctuations and inadequate humidity control. Samuel Brooks, the territorial agricultural agent, visited Hogan's homestead in late March to document the phenomenon that contradicted every official recommendation he had made during his 5 years of extension service. Brooks descended into the deep cellar with a thermometer and hydrometer, recording temperature readings of 37 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity levels of 89%, conditions that had remained constant throughout the winter crisis that destroyed standard storage systems across 18 homesteads in his jurisdiction. His measurements revealed the engineering principles that Norwegian immigrants understood, but American agricultural authorities had dismissed as unnecessary complexity. The agent's official report to territorial headquarters would later describe vegetables stored for 8 months that remained indistinguishable from fresh harvest in appearance, texture, and nutritional value. Brooks documented the stark contrast between preservation methods. Hogan's deep excavation maintained stable conditions that prevented cellular damage, while shallow cellars experienced temperature swings from 12 below zero to 45 above that caused freeze-thaw cycles devastating to vegetable tissue. The territorial agricultural guidelines that Brooks had confidently promoted now appeared fatally inadequate for extreme weather conditions that tested storage systems beyond their design parameters. Captain William Hayes, commanding supply operations at Fort Abraham Lincoln, arrived at Hogan's homestead in early April to investigate civilian food preservation techniques that might benefit military storage operations. Hayes documented the Norwegian storage capacity, 1,200 pounds of vegetables maintaining perfect preservation after 8 months underground, and compared these results to military food storage methods that achieved similar preservation only through expensive and logistically complex supply chain management. His report would recommend immediate investigation of deep excavation techniques for military food preservation applications. The sharing of Hogan's preserved vegetables followed Norwegian cultural traditions that prioritized community survival over individual advantage. Rather than charging desperate families for food that could command premium prices during the starvation crisis, Hogan distributed vegetables according to family size and need, following customs developed through centuries of Arctic survival, where community cooperation meant the difference between collective survival and widespread death. His 1,200 pounds of stored vegetables sustained 18 families through March and April, preventing the abandonment of 6 homesteads whose families lacked sufficient nutrition to survive until spring planting. The technical analysis of Hogan's preservation success revealed the sophisticated engineering behind what neighbors had dismissed as immigrant stubbornness. Constant temperature maintenance between 37 and 39 Fahrenheit prevented cellular damage that occurred with freeze-thaw cycles experienced in shallow storage. Stable humidity levels between 87 and 92% prevented dehydration without promoting bacterial and fungal growth that thrived in poorly ventilated storage areas. Most critically, Hogan's deep excavation placed his storage area below the frost penetration depth that had destroyed shallow cellars throughout Burleigh County. At 10 feet, underground, his vegetables rested within the Earth's thermal mass zone, where temperature remained constant regardless of surface atmospheric conditions. The Norwegian immigrant had understood principles of soil thermal dynamics that American homesteaders learned through bitter experience during the winter of 1884 to 1885. The social transformation within the homesteading community became evident as families who had mocked Hogan's methods now sought to understand the knowledge behind his success. Morrison spent hours in the deep cellar, measuring dimensions and examining construction techniques that had seemed excessive during their installation, but proved essential during the crisis that tested every aspect of frontier preparation. Schultz documented the ventilation system design, drainage implementation, and insulation methods that distinguished successful preservation from catastrophic failure. Anna Hogan managed the daily distribution of vegetables with the efficiency of someone trained in traditional Norwegian household management during extended winter seasons. She organized families into rotation schedules that ensured equitable access to preserved food supplies while maintaining the storage conditions necessary for continued preservation of remaining vegetables. Her knowledge of proper vegetable cleaning, storage container management, and seasonal inventory rotation maximized the effectiveness of the preservation system that her husband's construction had made possible. The preservation success extended beyond mere food security to encompass nutritional adequacy that prevented the scurvy and vitamin deficiencies that threatened families whose storage systems had failed. Children who had shown early signs of malnutrition recovered their health as preserved vegetables provided the vitamins and minerals essential for winter survival in a climate that eliminated fresh food sources for 6 months each year. Hogan's traditional storage methods proved superior not only for food preservation, but for maintaining the nutritional quality necessary for frontier family survival during extended isolation periods. The transformation of Burleigh County's approach to food storage began before the last snows of 1885 had melted. John Morrison broke ground on a new root cellar in April, excavating with the methodical precision of a man who had learned the cost of inadequate preparation. He dug to 9 feet below the surface, following Hogan's specifications exactly, lining the walls with field stone gathered from his own property and installing the dual ventilation system that had seemed unnecessary just months earlier. Morrison's investment of $47 in materials and 2 weeks of back-breaking labor represented a complete reversal of his previous confidence in shallow storage methods. Hinrich Schultz convinced 3 neighboring families to pool their labor for simultaneous excavation of 4 deep cellars, reducing individual effort while ensuring that each homestead would have access to proven preservation technology before the next winter's test. The Bavarian immigrant, who had abandoned his homeland storage traditions, now embraced techniques that combined Norwegian engineering with collective German work organization. Each cellar followed Hogan's 10-foot depth specification, incorporated proper drainage systems, and featured the sophisticated ventilation design that maintained optimal storage conditions without thermal loss. Samuel Brooks, the territorial agricultural agent whose official recommendations had failed so catastrophically, reversed his position with the bureaucratic efficiency of a man protecting his professional reputation. His revised guidelines, distributed throughout Dakota Territory during the summer of 1885, now advised deep excavation for reliable winter storage, citing documented evidence of superior preservation achieved through thermal mass utilization and controlled environmental conditions. Brooks's new recommendation specified 9 to 12-foot depths, proper drainage installation, and dual ventilation systems as essential components of reliable food storage in northern plains climate conditions. The technical refinements that emerged from the first generation of deep cellars incorporated improvements based on Hogan's original design, while adapting to local soil conditions and available materials. Standard depth recommendations increased to 10 to 12 feet throughout Dakota Territory, ensuring storage areas remained below frost penetration depths during extreme winter conditions. Drainage systems expanded to include perimeter French drains that routed groundwater away from storage areas before it could freeze and create thermal bridges that transferred cold to preservation chambers. Ventilation systems evolved to include adjustable dampers that allowed seasonal airflow control, enabling homesteaders to optimize air circulation for different storage requirements throughout the preservation period. Norwegian immigrants contributed additional knowledge about insulated entrance shafts that prevented cold air infiltration during cellar access, while Swedish settlers shared techniques for constructing specialized storage containers that maintained optimal humidity levels for different vegetable types within the same preservation chamber. The specialized zoning concept that Hogan had pioneered in his expanded storage system became standard practice as homesteaders learned to manage different preservation methods to maximize the preservation life of different vegetable types. Within single cellars, root vegetables like potatoes, turnips, and carrots required 85 to 90% humidity for optimal long-term storage, while apples needed 90 to 95% humidity in separate chambers with enhanced ventilation to prevent ethylene gas accumulation that caused premature ripening. Advanced cellar designs incorporated multiple storage zones with different environmental controls, maximizing preservation effectiveness for diverse agricultural products. By 1890, deep excavation root cellars throughout Dakota Territory achieved 95% food preservation rates through 8-month storage periods, compared to the 60 to 70% success rates that had been considered acceptable under previous shallow storage methods. Families routinely stored 800 to 1,200 pounds of vegetables per household, with spoilage rates consistently below 5% when proper construction and management techniques were followed. The nutritional impact proved equally significant. Vitamin C retention averaged 90% after 6 months of storage, compared to 50% achieved through shallow cellars that survived previous winter conditions. The quantified success of deep storage methods attracted attention from military food preservation specialists who recognized applications beyond homestead food security. Captain William Hayes's reports to territorial headquarters documented preservation techniques that maintain nutritional quality for extended periods without the logistical complexity of military supply chains. His recommendations led to experimental deep storage installations at frontier military posts, where traditional Norwegian techniques proved superior to existing military food preservation methods for maintaining nutritional adequacy during extended isolation periods. Modern agricultural researchers would later recognize the principles demonstrated by 1880s Norwegian root cellars as superior to refrigeration for long-term vegetable storage applications. Contemporary food preservation experts acknowledged that properly constructed earth-sheltered storage achieved better humidity control, more stable temperatures, and superior nutritional retention than mechanical refrigeration systems that created temperature fluctuations and dehydration problems during extended storage periods. Universities studying sustainable food preservation documented frontier root cellar designs as examples of engineering sophistication that modern technology had yet to surpass. The cultural transmission of traditional knowledge became evident as immigrant communities contributed specialized techniques developed through centuries of harsh climate survival experience. Norwegian families shared understanding of thermal mass principles that enabled stable temperature control without external energy inputs. German immigrants contributed precision construction methods and collective labor organization that made complex excavation projects economically feasible for homesteading families. Swedish settlers provided expertise in specialized storage container design and humidity management that optimized preservation conditions for specific agricultural products. The regional influence of proven deep storage techniques extended throughout the northern plains as successful preservation methods spread through immigrant communities and territorial agricultural extension services. By 1895, root cellars constructed according to Norwegian thermal mass principles operated successfully from Montana Territory to Minnesota, providing reliable food preservation for homesteading families in climates that demanded sophisticated understanding of temperature control and moisture management during extended winter seasons. Eric Hogan's original 1883 root cellar continued operating with minimal maintenance for 47 years until his homestead was sold in 1930. Temperature measurements taken during the 1920s confirmed that his storage chamber maintained the same 37 to 39 range that had proven successful during the catastrophic winter of 1884 to 1885. His preservation techniques influenced root cellar construction throughout 3 generations of northern plains settlement, contributing to successful agricultural development in territories that might otherwise have been abandoned due to inadequate food preservation capabilities. The enduring lesson transcended specific construction techniques to encompass broader principles of traditional knowledge validation and cultural adaptation. His success resulted not from superior intelligence or innovative engineering, but from respecting time-tested methods developed through centuries of survival experience in comparable climate conditions. His Norwegian heritage provided access to techniques refined through generations of Arctic winters that lasted 7 months, knowledge that proved essential when Dakota Territory experienced weather conditions that exceeded the design parameters of conventional American storage methods. The integration of immigrant knowledge with frontier necessity created preservation technology that surpassed both traditional Norwegian methods and conventional American techniques. Deep storage systems that evolved in Dakota Territory incorporated the thermal mass principles of Arctic survival with the efficient construction methods of American frontier engineering, producing food preservation capabilities that enabled successful homesteading in climate conditions that had previously limited agricultural settlement to areas with more moderate winter temperatures.